It's October, the time for scary stories, and this October I decided that I was long overdue for a reread of the classic Dracula by Bram Stoker. So, in this video, this is what I call one of my starting videos, in which I start a new reading project and I talk about why I've chosen that book and what my history with it is and what I hope to get out of it, etc. And these are videos I usually film before I've started reading anything or right at the very beginning of the book. So just be forewarned about that. Also, this is a reread. I have read this book kind of in years past, and I'll get into my history with this book throughout this video, but just a warning that I will be spoiling plot points in this because I'm going to talk about plot points that I remember from the book as I go through it. Right. So to start at the very beginning, obviously I've decided I'm going to read this book for the month of October to coincide with Halloween reading. Now, I normally, if you watch this channel, you'll know that I normally don't take part in BookTube events. The primary reason is I'm just such a slow reader that I can't keep pace with it. So a book like this, which is looks like it's about 350 pages, that could easily be 6 weeks for me. It's rough for me to finish these things in 1 month on schedule. But the 10-year-old boy in me just has to do something scary for Halloween. It's it's a one book event of the year that I feel like I just have to get on board with. So last year, I did The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells, in part because it was such a short book. And I picked this up near the end of October because last year I didn't have the opportunity to get to a bookstore until the end of October. This year, I had already been planning on reading Dracula, so I picked this book up well in advance last month. And I've held this up before in my weekly reading vlogs. I'll link to that video in the description down below. Because Dracula is the classic book that you would associate with Halloween, isn't it? In fact, I was thinking about this, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think of all the classic horror books or the classic monster books, Dracula is the only one that is actually written as horror, right? Am I wrong about this? Like The Invisible Man, I know it's since been appropriated as one of the Universal monster movies, etc. But it's really more of a science fiction book than it is a horror book. There's a couple scenes in there. Frankenstein strikes me as much more of a Greek tragedy, right? It's not really. There's some gothic spookiness going on there, but it's really not trying to be scary. It's trying to be tragic. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that wasn't really supposed to be scary, was it? War of the Worlds, more of an invasion story, I think. Some science fiction element. Phantom of the Opera, more of kind of a romance and mystery thriller. I I think of all the classic horror, and when I say classic horror, I'm counting the ones that people remember today. So I'm when I say people, I mean the public at large. So I know there are some vampire stories by Lord Byron or something like that, which precede Dracula, precede or proceed. But I think outside of literature majors, nobody remembers Lord Byron's vampire stories. So I think this is the I don't know. Let me know if I'm overlooking something. I think this is like the only classic horror book that's actually supposed to be horror. And I know it's not really that scary by today's standards, but it was that's what it was supposed to be. It was designed to be horror, right? Anyway, that digression aside, I've talked about this numerous times on this channel before, the fascination I had with horror as a young boy. And I wasn't really allowed access to it because I grew up in a conservative Christian household with parents who were very restrictive in terms of what I saw or what I read. But you can't escape Dracula and Frankenstein. They were just everywhere in the pop culture. And I was fascinated by them. And I wasn't allowed to watch any of the movies, but I was very curious about what it would be like. And eventually, I did get my hands on the comic book version of Frankenstein. This was the Marvel Classic version, which was, if you grew up in the 80s, maybe you remember these, published by Fisher Price, and they had accompanying audio cassette to it. And that was obviously the abridged version, the comic book version, but it was a retelling of the original novel. And I remember being surprised when I first read that or listened to it, that it actually had a plot to it. Because prior to this, I had never had any experience with a horror story. I thought it was just like 2 hours of the monster roaming around killing people at random, shot from the monster's point of view, until finally the monster gets killed in the very final scene, and then the movie is over or the book is over. So I was, it was interesting. I don't know. This is one of those things that sticks out in my memory as a kid. That the book actually had a plot, and it was from Dr. Frankenstein's point of view, not the monster's, for most of it, etc. Now, Dracula, I didn't have access to a comic book version of this, but I remember being very curious about it. And one afternoon, I think I must have been about third grade. We had a babysitter who was watching us during the summer months when my mom and dad were working. And she would tell us all sorts of stuff. And she had read the story of Dracula, but didn't know about Frankenstein. So we told her about Frankenstein based on the comic book version of it. We meaning my sister and I. And she told us the story of Dracula, that she had read the novel. And so that did something to satiate my curiosity. But then in middle school, I did find an abridged version of Dracula in the school library. Now, this is one of those simplified for kids versions of Dracula, like the Classics Illustrated version or something like that. I don't remember what the actual publisher was. But I read that. My mom wasn't thrilled about it, but it was a classic and it was from the school library, so she didn't really say anything, except I had a few nightmares that week, which I don't think were related to the book. I think that those are just because kids get nightmares sometimes. But my mom was very quick to point out to me. She said, I think this is because of that Dracula book you've been reading. When I was in high school, my parents finally relented and allowed me to watch some of those old black and white movies. Like I said, I had a restricted upbringing. And those were still very much in the culture. I don't know how much in the culture they are now, but people still used to talk about those old black and white movies at the time. So I saw the black and white version of the Bela Lugosi version of Dracula, Frankenstein, and all those movies. And didn't really feel a need to pick up the novel for years, actually. After having read the abridged version in middle school, for years after that, I kind of figured I had read it, which was my attitude when I was a kid, and maybe a common attitude among kids. I don't know. I didn't feel the need to read the authentic original text. If I had gotten the story from an abridged or simplified version of it, fine. I considered that as a classic conquered. But of course, you do reach adulthood. You get into college, and then you realize that no, that doesn't actually count. You do have to actually read the original classic. So The unabridged version of Dracula I did as an audiobook way back in 2001. I was big into audiobooks at the time, and I had just discovered that the public library had free audiobooks that anyone could check out. They were on cassette tapes at the time. Listened to them in the cassette player of my car as I would drive around, and did Dracula like that as an audiobook. I've gone through a few different changes in my attitude with audiobooks over the years. One of the changes I've made over the years is I've started listening to an audiobook 2 or 3 times before I consider it finished. Just because I've realized that sometimes I can get distracted and then miss key parts of the audiobooks, especially if I'm doing stuff while I'm listening to it. I'm almost always doing stuff. Now, back in 2001, the stuff I was doing was driving. So, if you're on the expressway or if you're kind of cruising, you can kind of turn your brain off and just really focus in on the words of the audiobook. But if you're negotiating downtown traffic, trying to get to some place that you've never been to before, then you can easily miss part of the book. And I think I did actually miss parts of it. Like the words were audible. I heard them, but they didn't really go in. And the part actually that has always stuck with me as something I missed was, and spoilers here, the guy from Texas, what was his name? Quincy, I think. He dies at the end in the big battle with Dracula. And the big battle with Dracula, the climactic part of the book, which I think is maybe more of a battle with Dracula's gypsies than it is with Dracula himself. That was part of the book where I was distracted doing some driving on streets I was unfamiliar with, trying to find my way. And then I didn't realize Quincy was dead until like the very end of the book, when all the characters were talking about how brave he was and what a good man he was. And I was like, oh shoot, I missed that part. And so that's always stuck in my mind as, did I really read the whole of Dracula, or have I been, whenever people ask which classics have you read, I'm always kind of ambivalent if I could count that. So I guess that's one reason why some 20 years later I'm going to come back and read the original text. Quincy, by the way, the guy from Texas, I think I'm remembering his name right, Mr. Quincy Morris. He is not integral to the plot so much. He's more of one of these other characters who's around with the gang. So he, I think, will almost always end up getting omitted in abridged versions, which is why the abridged version I read when I was in middle school didn't have him in it. But that's something I picked up doing the unabridged version by audiobook. And I did, aside from missing out on Quincy's death, I think I did absorb a fair amount of this book by audiobook. Of course, this was 20 years ago, so it's very little of it is in the long-term memory. But I do remember the conceit of the novel, which is, I guess this is one of the reasons why you would want to go to the unabridged version as opposed to the kids version. In the abridged versions, they just usually tell it like a normal novel. But in the unabridged and in the real version, there's a conceit going on that this is like a found footage novel. I know that's an anachronism, but everything in here is like a document. So there are letters, there's journal entries. I think in some parts there's a phonograph. One of the characters, I believe it was Van Helsing, dictates into a phonograph. So yeah, journals, letters, phonographs, diary. They're just all. The idea is that these documents have all been found. I think yeah, it's right at the beginning. How these papers have been placed in sequence, blah 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 blah. So it's like these are a whole bunch of letters and journals and phonograph recordings that have all been found and put together by a later author, later editor. Much like, the found footage trend in horror movies, where it looks like this is a whole bunch of authentic footage. The other thing I remember surprising me a little bit is, or not surprising me, but something that stuck in my memory maybe. So in the novel, Jonathan Harker, and again spoiler, goes to Transylvania to meet Count Dracula and gets imprisoned by him. But then later does escape, and after a rough recovery, ends up becoming one of the heroes fighting Dracula. In the black and white movie, the 1931 Bela Lugosi movie, it is Renfield who goes to meet Dracula in Transylvania at his castle. And Renfield ends up getting corrupted by Dracula. Dracula, I don't remember actually now. Dracula drinks some of his blood, or turns Renfield into his servant. And then for the rest of the movie, Renfield is the helpless servant of Dracula. Now, Renfield in the novel is a mental patient who escapes and tries to join Dracula. Not somebody who Dracula had corrupted. I think I'm remembering that right. But anyways, even though I should have known better because I did read the abridged version in middle school, the movie version was fresher in my mind because I had seen the movie more recently. So I was expecting that Jonathan Harker was going to eventually get attacked by Dracula and turned into the Renfield character. Which I was thinking, here Renfield, would be a rather tragic thing to do to that character, because you're the first few chapters is all told from Jonathan Harker's perspective. So the reader or listener, if you're doing this by audiobook, really gets to feel like you get to know this character. And I was thinking to myself, oh boy, this is going to be really tragic, or I don't know, hardcore, horrifying, when Dracula makes Jonathan Harker into his slave. But yeah, that was. It's different in the novel. That was a change that the 1931 movie made. Sorry, I'm rambling, aren't I? I'm just talking about all my reminiscences of having read this. I've not come back to the original text since then, although in the last few years I've revisited various abridged versions several times because I've been teaching English abroad in Asia. And quite often to teenagers, kids who are 10, 11, 12, 13. And I don't know what it is, but 10, 11, 12, they are just fascinated by horror. I mean, I was the same when I was their age. I don't know what it is, something about human nature. But if you want to get their attention, you do some sort of scary story as the in-class reading. So there's a whole bunch of abridged or simplified versions of Dracula that are made for the English as a second language classroom. Some of them have audio CDs that go along with them so that you can listen and read. I've done numerous versions of them over the years. I did a comic book version of Dracula with one class where I put the comic book into a PowerPoint and we read it together. I've been through the story so many times, and again, like the simplified versions omit characters like Quincy the Texan, etc., and quite often omit Renfield the mental patient. But the basic beats of the story, I feel like I'm very familiar with now. And also the Anno Dracula book by Kim Newman. I read that about 10 years ago, and that also picks up. Um, well, that's an interesting book. That's an alternate version of Dracula, but that was also a reacquaintance with some of these characters in the plot. So, in that sense, I probably don't need to revisit this book in the sense that I still remember the basic plot quite well, but the details and the prose style, maybe that will be worth revisiting. At any rate, you couldn't ask for a more, what's the word I'm looking for? Classic, stereotypical book to do for Halloween. And so this is what I'm going to be doing for the month of October. Now, like I said at the beginning of the video, being a slow reader, under normal circumstances, this could take me more than a month. But because I'm doing this as an event for the month of October and Halloween, I'm going to make a special effort to finish this before October 31st. And just any time before October 31st will be good. I'll just count this as a Halloween read if it gets read anytime in October. I'm not going to try and read the last few pages on Halloween itself. I'm way too busy and I've got kids, so I can't do anything clever like that. So going to try and prioritize this book over the next few weeks, finish it before October 31st. Oh, and another thought that occurs to me. I said I don't usually do BookTube events, but if you're on BookTube, you know that it's also Victober, where people read Victorian literature for the month of October, and this also counts. This was written during the reign of Queen Victoria in 1897, I believe. Am I remembering that right? So this is a double whammy here: Halloween read and a Victober read. The edition I got here, which I've been flipping through on the camera, is Word Cloud Classics. For whatever reason, these are what the bookstores in Vietnam are currently stocking. I read one earlier this year, Bullfinch's Mythology, which I also picked up from a bookstore here in Vietnam, and this was also a Word Cloud Classic. It's got, I don't know what material this is on the cover. It kind of looks classy, like it's some sort of leather, but it feels like it's some sort of rubber. Just as well, huh? Hopefully no cows died in the making of this book. But yeah, anyways. This is the book I'm reading. That's my history with it. Hope to be done with this sometime before the end of October. And happy Halloween and happy Victober to everyone. We'll check in and tell you how this book is going as I continue with it.